Hello, folks. Welcome to the 4.0 Schools app webinar for our fellowships in this fall. So for fall 2018, we are excited that you've taken some time afternoon to join us. My name is Austin. I work here at 4.0 on the Tiny Fellowship. Really glad to see a lot of your faces there's like a Brady Bunch thing happening here, so I can see a bunch of different faces from all over the country. Thanks to all of you for introducing yourself in the chat. We have a good number of people here. I think about 25 folks from looks like a bunch of different states around the country, which is exciting. And so we'll hopefully get to hear a lot from all of you in the chat as we go through, but we'll just dive right in. So this is all about giving you a chance to get a sense of our two fellowship programs, get a sense about what 4.0 is all about, and see where you might fit and where you're most excited about plugging into our work. And it's also a chance for us to meet you. So we're excited about both of those things. The agenda is pretty simple. We'll start talking about 4.0 schools overall, just so you can get a sense of who we are beyond the website, see some different faces. We'll talk about our two fellowships and how they overlap and connect. And then we'll actually do a quick deep dive in the Essentials Fellowship with Sydney, who works directly on that program. And then I'll talk to you about that. And at the very end, if you stick around, we're happy to do a Q&A with any and all of you, and we'll just popcorn. We have a small enough room that we could probably have a little bit of a conversation, which is exciting. So before we do that, I want to make sure you know who all is in the room. So here's a fantastic photo of our team. Not everyone, but we have a few folks in the room right now with different roles. So I'll just share the computer here. They'll introduce themselves, and then we'll introduce some alumni. So again, my name is Austin. I work on the Tiny Fellowship here at 4.0, and my favorite book is Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kastner. Today, and my favorite book is The Alchemist.
Hello, everybody. My name is Hassan. I'm the interim CEO here at 4.0 Schools, and I am my favorite book. I have to go back to Teenage Mutant.
Hello, everyone. My name is
So hopefully that didn't make you nauseous, getting that little tilt-a-whirl experience. But wanted to make sure you met the team. Everybody in the room will be on chat throughout this. So as you have questions, things that come to mind, do drop them in the chat, because all of us, if we're not speaking, are monitoring and trying to respond in real time. But next, I want to go ahead and introduce, we actually have 3 alumni on the call. Nick Aziz may be joining us a little later. And so I'll kind of give you the preview on who he is in just a moment. But we'll start left to right. So Jen, if you want to chime in and introduce yourself, and then have Michaela join after that.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jen Cho. My venture is Code Speak Labs. We do computer science education for kids. I was a Tiny Wave Fellow 1. I also did Essentials. And now I'm a founder advisor for a team that's in the current cohort. And I'm a 4.0 super fan and really excited to hear about your guys' ideas and tell you more about my experience.
Amazing. And Michaela, can you jump in?
Today, I just learned about what school could be by Ted Dintersmith, so I'm secretly skimming the excerpt here while we talk. But I went through Essentials and Tiny Wave 1 with Jen, and then I'm also a coach for the current Wave 4.
Michaela, thanks for joining us. And it's good to see you. Has Nick Aziz hopped on the call yet? Does anybody know? Awesome. Well, Nick was also a Wave 1 Tiny alum, and he is running an awesome organization here in New Orleans called Rightbrain, which is all about really exposing young folks in the city in writing and developing their writing skills and a creative voice. It's really cool. Students are amazing. He'll be trying to jump on a little bit later. But in the meantime, just wanted you to have a sense of who you're going to be hearing from. So just a quick reminder, please mute your mic if you're not speaking at any point. There can be a little bit of a feedback loop that comes up sometimes if we don't do that, so just keep that in mind. And definitely, again, keep dropping us questions in the chat. And I really want to quickly pause and poll the room. I saw audio was cutting out earlier. Could I just put like give me a 5 if it's great audio, a 1 if you can hear nothing, which I guess you wouldn't even respond, and then like a 3 if it's just spotty right now, because we're trying to make sure that our tech is working. So in the chat, okay, 3. Okie doke. Amazing. Thank you. This is fun. Real-time feedback is very good. I appreciate it. So sorry you guys couldn't hear our staff intros. You'll hear from all of us again in just a moment. If you missed it, I'm on the call. Sydney Kastner, who will be talking to you about essentials, is on the call. Hassan, our interim CEO, is on the call. And then Brianna, our communications lead and the champion of all things webinar questions, because she is monitoring the chat furiously right now on her phone, which is fun. They're all on the call, so you'll hear from us individually going forward. But just flag if you can't hear us again like that, and we'll pause and see if we can make sure to fix things. But thanks for the heads up, and sorry for the tech trouble. So to introduce 4.0, I'm going to go ahead and play a little video that'll just give you the broad overview, and then we'll hand it off to Hassan to tell you a bit more from a leadership perspective about what 4.0 is all about. So just give me a moment. I'm going to set up the video. So I'm going to mute for just a minute here, and then you'll see the video start to play.
Well, I think for entrepreneurs in education, people are trying to make school better for kids and families. The big problem is that there's no attention to this stage. It's as if this stage doesn't exist. There's no place for people to try new ideas.
I had discussions with different people about this idea that I had to take kids out of New Orleans and get them writing. They showed me 4.0. And I knew that I wanted to be in something that was going to, number one, recognize the value of what I was coming with, but also help me, because I realized I needed help.
There are 4 things that we provide at this stage that are critical. The first is coaching, and that is just being with someone and pulling that idea out, and then with love and candor, giving people feedback. It takes some skill to coach at this early level. The second is capital. In this world of schooling and education, there are too few folks willing to bring capital up into these early stages. So we bring cash to you at a stage when most investors wouldn't even think about talking to you. The third thing we do is provide community. And we think that this iterative process of putting your ideas in front of families and students and having them give you feedback is rooted not in this overly romanticized vision of the entrepreneur as dude, usually white dude in a garage, coming up with something magical and making lives better. It's rooted in community, people who are giving you feedback.
Being around the 4.0 staff, learning from them and vibing with them and getting that energy from them is something that stimulates me and keeps pushing me.
And then the fourth thing is credibility. Folks want to see that an idea works. So getting through these iterations and getting someone to the place where their idea is having an impact on kids and families, that provides credibility that can unlock all of that capital that is stacked downstream right now.
As entrepreneurs, we need that because we have so much going on in our heads. And we need that network of people to help us, that support.
All right, cool. All right, sweet.
Awesome. I saw a few notes about audio there. Hopefully you were able to catch most of that. That's our one and most gigantic technological marvel in this presentation. Sharing a video through a webinar feels very meta. So hopefully you caught most of it. If not, we'll be reiterating in just a moment with Hassan. So I'm going to pass it off to him. And just quickly, I'm going to share my screen. So give me a moment as I do that. All right, so passing it off to Hassan.
All right. Hi, everybody. Again, if you didn't hear my introduction earlier, my name is Hassan, and I'm the interim CEO of 4.0 Schools. I'm really excited to get a chance to get to know you all a little bit more today through this webinar. And what I wanted to do just for the next minute or two is just to expand a little bit of what Matt Candler, our founder and CEO, has shared in the video, and talk a little bit about why we exist as an organization as 4.0. So what you see in front of you right now is our mission statement. We exist as an organization because we want more people like you to participate in the process of designing the future of school in your local communities. Today, we believe that the process and the path to launching new learning spaces and tools is too opaque and too inaccessible for too many people. And our goal is to make that path more transparent and more accessible. And the way that we try to do that is by creating the right conditions for people with ideas to get these ideas off the ground. So that includes building a community that is supportive, providing coaching on a process that helps you vet the idea at the earliest stages, and providing some capital to help you get the idea again off the ground. So I wanted to also just talk a little bit about the word community, because it is something that we believe is an important feature of our work. Innovation is about people, and our goal is to, again, create a community where folks are supporting each other, are coaching each other. These are some of the beautiful faces of alumni who have gone through our programming in the past years. And right now, as an organization, we are at over 800 folks who have come through our programming. And our vision as an organization is to see this community continue to grow and be more representative of the nuanced diversity in our country. And that's something that we continue to make our way towards as an organization. And so where I want to just leave it is this is what we try to live in our work. Ultimately, what we want to do is to bring in more voices into the process of innovation. We want folks to work on ideas that they believe are needed in the context of their own community. And we want the process to be about taking smaller bets and to limit the risk that often isn't inherent in the process of starting something new. And we want a community that is really bought into the concept of designing with the people that are experiencing the need today. So not trying to do work to or for or on behalf students and families, but truly doing the work in concert with them. So I'm excited to get to chat a little bit more. I'll be monitoring the chat with Brianna to answer any questions. And if for any reason we can't get to any questions today, I'm always excited to have a conversation outside of this webinar today. So I'll pass it now to Sydney, who's gonna bring it back and start talking a little bit more about the two programs that we invest in here at 4.0.
Thanks, Hassan. Okay, so now that we've heard a little bit more about 4.0, we're gonna dig a little bit deeper into both programs, into how they're similar and how they are different. So at a really high level, the Essentials Fellowship takes fellows from having an idea of a venture that you want to start to running your first experience with the people that you want to work with. And we call that a pop-up. The Tiny Fellowship takes people from having that pop-up, having that event with the people you want to work with, to running a more long-term pilot. So we're going to talk about how these programs overlap. So one way in which the Essentials Fellowship and Tiny Fellowship overlap is in the types of, the qualities of the fellows that we look for. So we are really excited to work with people who are really passionate about identifying, defining, and solving problems rather than the particular solution idea that they have when they get here. As well as people who are very hungry for tough feedback in order to make their venture as helpful and successful as possible in order to best solve that problem for the people that they're working with. In our fellowships, you'll receive feedback from one another, from our team, from coaches, and we think the most important feedback that you'll get is from the people that you're working with within your community. So we're really excited to find people who are really looking forward to getting that feedback from all of those stakeholders. We're also looking for people who have a really specific and clear idea of what the problem is that people are feeling, who are the people who are experiencing that problem, and what is the solution idea you want to put forth. That's not to say whatever your idea is right now needs to be perfectly clear and specific. We want it to be as specific and clear as you can make it right now, and we look forward to helping you with that process as you come through our programs. And finally, we really see education as a tool for improving equity in the world, specifically in the US. So that can be equity as far as racial equity, gender equity, all kinds of different ways. So we're excited to work with people who see that as something that their venture does, whether it's a main focus or something that's just involved in the work that you're doing. So other ways that we overlap are in the types of ideas that we invest in. So we're excited to work with people who are impacting students and families, who are anywhere from the parents or the students or the caregivers, anywhere from 0 years to the transition from high school into whatever the next step is within the United States. So those can be, they can look a variety of different ways. They could be schools, programs, services, educational technology tools, physical products, and maybe something we've never thought about before. We're excited to hear what you guys are working on. Those can be either nonprofits or for-profits. We're excited about both. And we right now have a prioritization. We want to work with people who are directly impacting students and families. Those typically, organizations that are directly impacting students and families typically take the shape of programs, services, and schools, but they also sometimes can look very different, and that's what we're looking forward to learning from you guys. We also have a new focus on early childhood education that we're really excited to be really curious about and to support folks who are working in the early childhood education space. So now that we've gone over a little bit of how both of these programs overlap, we're going to head to Austin to talk about where you might fit in the path of these programs.
Awesome. So Sydney did a good job of showing the overlap of our programming. And, one thing I'll double down on here too is that something we say at 4.0 is that we see our fellowships and our work with founders as a way to invest in the 20-year version of everyone who comes through our doors. And so at the end of the day, whether you come through Essentials, come through the Tiny Fellowship, it's really all about investing in you as leaders and shaping education for years to come. And we know that your ideas are bound to change a lot over the course of the time that you work on them here and beyond. And so I just wanted to name that, but I also want to name that for the focus and clarity of our fellowship programming, we the stage that your idea is currently at, right? So the stage of development of your work, it helps us focus on what supports to put in front of you. And so this is a very confusing, jargony graph explaining how we think an education idea might come to life. I'll talk you through it and explain how each program sort of overlaps with it. So we believe, all of this starts with somebody having an idea, somebody like you having an idea and wanting to take action on it. And Essentials is here to help you take that first step. Sydney talked about that already. We think that looks like immediately starting to engage with and learn from students and families that you want to partner with to build whatever organization you're building. And then actually building a first taste of that experience, a pop-up as we call it. And that's what Essentials is designed to do. It's designed to take that idea from your head and make it tangible as quickly as possible in the tiniest way possible, right? We expect that folks will often go through that process over and over again before coming to Tiny. Sometimes they'll pop up once, come to Tiny. Sometimes there'll be a lot more work in between. A question that is really helpful to ask as you're considering applying is, how much have I worked with my users? And users is just our jargony way of saying the students that are coming to your school, or the person that's going to download your ed tech tool. So it's the person that's going to use whatever solution you're building. And if you haven't worked with your users very much yet, Essentials may be a great step. If you were like, I've been doing that for years, it may be good to start thinking about Tiny. So after you've done that work, the Tiny Fellowship is all about helping you go from these moments, these little experiences, these pop-ups, and actually working with a group of students, families of your users over an extended period of time to actually understand the impact your idea can have. It's meant to be a bit of a tiny proof point, if you will, of your work. And so we call that a pilot. And this is all about working with folks for an extended period of time and understanding, by collecting data from that experience, what your idea could become and what you need to do next. And so a good question to ask yourself at this stage is, do I know if my solution works, right? Do I know if what I'm working on is really having the impact and is it effective as I hope it will be? And if you don't know, Tiny could be a really great place to understand that in a really low stakes way. So one thing that I really want to highlight here is that throughout all of this timeline, you can be part-time. We want to support folks that are still full-time teachers, folks that are working full-time gigs. We think that is a way to be able to experiment and dabble and learn about what your idea can be well before you have to take on the risk of being a full-time entrepreneur. And we think it lets you be more bold in some of the decisions you might make about what your organization could be, and really test exciting ideas. So in just a moment, we're going to ask you all to drop in the chat where you think you might fit in this cadence. And maybe you're not sure, and that's totally fine, but I want you to just have that percolating in the back of your head right now. And we're going to hand it over to Michaela, who's on the call, and see if she can jump in and just say, how would you describe when Essentials is a great fit versus when Tiny is a great fit, knowing that you've seen both programs, gone through both. So Michaela, I will hand it over to you, but I'm going to unmute you really fast because I think I might have left you muted.
All right, thanks. Yeah, so definitely can answer that question. I can tell you where we were when we did Essentials and where our school was when we did Tiny. So when we started Essentials, it was kind of a vague idea in my mind. Like, I think I want to start this school that's like roughly about this, and maybe there's someone that might want to pay me for this to send their kids. And so Essentials was really helpful. I never pitched the idea to anyone outside of my family and close friends. And so just to share the idea with someone else outside of that inner network was really helpful to see how people responded, and then going out into the community and talking to folks and seeing random parents on the street and saying, hey, how do you think about school? What do you think about this? Was helpful to just get some feedback and then to map out our first pilot. So after Essentials, we did an after school program and to test some of the ideas of our model. And then with Tiny, going into that, we've done the after school programs. We talked to a ton of families in Atlanta. We had a much stronger idea of this is viable. I'm pretty sure we can get this off the ground, up and running. Might have even been started roughly when we started the Tiny Fellowship. And so at a very much a different place. And so that was more so about how do we get the coaching around the business side of it, financial, legal, that sort of thing, insurance, and then how do we continue to test and innovate and get feedback now that our school is up and running or about to be, so that we can continue to help it grow in this sort of baby state in our first year. So one, I would say Essentials is more for I have an idea, I want to get some feedback, test it out, and Tiny is I'm pretty sure about this idea, I'm ready to either get it off the ground or scale it.
Michaela, thanks for jumping in. Yeah, and so now that you have that context, I would love to see in the chat box, you'll find out if you come through our fellowships, we love Mad Libs, it's a problem. So if you could just fill in this Mad Lib. The blank fellowship is a fit for me because blank. And we're just curious about what you're thinking, and so we can get a feel of the room and also what to focus on as we keep going. So I will pause and watch the chat stream in. This is awesome. Thank you all for sharing and jumping in. If you haven't shared yet, please keep dropping in. It's just really fun for us to see, and hopefully also gives all of you context for who's in the room and what you're thinking about. I also have seen a couple more like one-on-one questions start coming through about your specific ideas. We're trying to monitor the chat and respond to those questions one-on-one as we go. And we'll also leave time at that Q&A at the end. So if you don't hear from us by then, please stick around and we'll try and address your questions as well. So this is awesome. At this point, I'm going to hand it back to Sydney, and she's going to tell you a lot about the Essentials Fellowship specifically. So I see a lot of Essentials alumni on the call, which is really exciting. Maybe they can chime in with some of their thoughts about Essentials in the chat, but I'll pass it to Sydney and she can give you the overview.
Awesome. Austin stole my thunder. I was so excited to see how many Essentials alumni, specifically Essentials fellows who are currently in our are like getting ready to run their pop-ups. Really excited to see you guys in here. And if you have anything, any reactions to ways that I'm explaining the Essentials Fellowship, happy to hear your comments in the chat. Or if you feel like you can answer some questions anyone has about Essentials. So another reminder, make sure to mute your microphone unless you're speaking, which should only be me for now. But we look forward to hearing from you in a little bit. And as you have, specifically at the end of the call, we'll do a Q&A. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat box. So we're going to talk about the Essentials Fellowship. So what you get from the Essentials Fellowship, three different areas here. So the first is coaching from entrepreneurs. So that's from our team of 4.0 team members, as well as local New Orleans-based alumni who've been through our programming and are experts in the process, as well as a community of peers. Really excited to see a lot of you on here now. There's a community of year one of 20 fellows or up to 20 fellows in a cohort, as well as one of 909, I think, alumni we have right now that you have access to. And we're excited to have that community, and we try to build some things in order to build some connections there. And capital to run your pop-ups. So we're going to dig into each of those a little bit more. So a timeline of support. The first is a self-guided equity course. You do that within your community. So you're going to do that at home, but not necessarily by yourself. You're going to be working with all kinds of people. The next is Essentials Camp, which is here in New Orleans. And we do have funds available to cover the cost of travel and for lodging. And then thirdly, coaching towards your pop-up within your community. So what that looks like is having, getting feedback from someone on the 4.0 team about what your plan is for your event, as well as having kind of a running buddy as you go, checking in, approving your plan for funding, and celebrating all of your wins and talking through some challenges. So first of all, that self-guided equity course, we are so excited about it. It's something that is relatively new to our programming. So a big focus of this is really, who are you in this work? What is your relationship to the problem and to the community? As well as what are the the historical and systemic sources of oppression that are already playing into the problem that you're jumping in to solve. Then you'll also talk to your users. So you bring in those students and families and teachers to see how they're experiencing the problem that you are trying to address. And also taking that first stab at just making it known what your idea might look like. Secondly, Essentials in New Orleans. For Essentials folks on the call, this picture probably looks really familiar to you. It's a lot of sticky notes on the wall. So the first day is really focused on building community with the people in the room. We know that you guys are your best support system, so we want to build that foundation on day one. Day two is more focused on your idea. So building out who is your user, as Austin alluded to, the people that are experiencing the problem, the people you're working with, what's the problem they're feeling, and what's the solution that you're going to put forth, as well as starting to identify what are the things that need to be true about what you're building in order for you to keep going. And then day three is jumping into designing that experience in order to make sure all of those pieces that need to be true are true for your users. So basically saying, is what I'm doing working, and are people interested in being there? So this pop-up is kind of what we've been alluding to for a while. So your first pop-up is what we coach you towards. So basically you're connected with a coach who will coach you through that. And we hope that it'll give you a chance to learn more and more about what you're doing so that you can start to run bigger tests. So we're going to talk through a pop-up example. One of our fellows, one of our alumni now, named Nick, has created an organization called Rightbrain, and they use travel as a catalyst for creative writing. We're going to talk to you a little bit about his pop-up, as well as about his pilot when we get to our tiny phase. So his pop-up was taking 10 students from a local school on a trip to Baton Rouge for a day. And as you can see here, they were outside of where Alton Sterling was murdered, and they did a reflection on that. So it was basically testing his assumptions about what kind of quality writing the kids could do after having experienced this, as well as just like connecting into their creativity. Great. So next thing we're going to talk about is the Tiny Fellowship.
Awesome. So as you'll see when we give you a little bit more of a preview of Nick's work with Rightbrain in piloting, you can sort of see how they connect. So we're going to talk through a lot of that with the Tiny Fellowship. But before we do, I mentioned before that both of these fellowships are really designed to be flexible and to work with you as potentially somebody who's full-time on other work. Jen Chu, I would argue, has like a million full-time jobs. She's one of our Wave 1 fellows on the call. And so I just wanted to open the floor for her to talk about her experience, particularly as a parent who is also an education founder, which we think is A, amazing, but B, a really like challenging schedule, I would imagine. So I'll let her speak about it. But Jen, you can go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, my video cut out, but yeah, the 4.0 fellowship was amazing. I have kids, as Austin mentioned, so I have a 4-year-old and I have a 2-year-old. And I looked into a bunch of different like incubators and fellowships, and really by far the 4.0 fellowships are the most flexible option out there. As evidenced by the fact I'm calling into the webinar right now while I'm with my kids at SeaWorld. So, you know, life is kind of crazy. But it allows you to really set your own milestones. So they give you a coach, a founder advisor. It's sort of like a personal trainer for your pilot, who can really, you know, give you a kick in the butt if you need it, who can give you strategies if you need it, but really allows you to structure your pilot around your schedule and whatever crazy things are happening in your life. You have a really flexible window of time. So it's about 6 months from when you get your initial training, you turn your pilot plans and with your camp to when you need to fill in your final documentation. And so there's a lot of time in that window to get what you need done. The other thing that's really cool about it is the network is, I mean, when I was a fellow, it was like all around the country, and now there's actually people internationally joining in, which is super cool. So it's an awesome global network, and people are super helpful and friendly and connected all online. And so I live in Orange County, California, which is like kind of terrible and conservative and boring. And also I don't have time to go networking stuff anyways. And so the fact that I can access this amazing network of smart, savvy education entrepreneurs from anywhere I am and anywhere they are is really incredible. So yeah, I mean, 4.0 can get you whatever you need on the timeline, you know, that you need it wherever you are. I think that's just been incredible. I'm also happy if folks have additional questions, or if you're a parent yourself and are, you know, struggling with balancing your venture and that, I'm happy to connect, and I'll put my email in the chat box too.
Jen, that is an awesome offer. Thank you for doing that, and thank you for jumping on while at SeaWorld. And a crazy ability to multitask that I really appreciate. So, you know, with that, we're going to dive into the Tiny Fellowship. I want to note, that was a great question by France in the chat. How are pop-ups tailored to our specific ideas? And I know there are some Essentials alumni in the chat. I don't want to, you know, forcibly deputize you, but if you have any thoughts on that question, I would love for you to respond to France in the chat. I think it would be really cool, and we'll definitely address it in the Q&A afterwards with Sydney. So just to talk about the Tiny Fellowship, a little bit. So you'll see that the structure of our fellowships actually mirror one another quite a lot. It's just the dosage of different things is different. So as you come through Tiny, you get three main things. Coaching, again, from entrepreneurs, a community of piloting peers, so folks that are going to be piloting around the same time, which can be really helpful. And then 10K in capital to run tests. And this is actually distributed as 5K after you've built your pilot plan, and then 5K once you report sort of the results of that work. And we see one additional C, which is just for the alliteration, which is credibility, right? And we don't mean that like a merit badge from 4.0. In fact, I think we find that to be a pretty tedious thing because it doesn't really say anything if you just went through our program. What we mean is that we want this to be a space where you can really, really interrogate whether or not your idea works, whether or not people want it, and start to understand what might be next for you. And we want to help you tell that story, you know, on your behalf. And we want this to be a space that supports that, and that the credibility comes from the work that you're doing. And so Tiny Essentials does the same thing, but Tiny is just a higher dose of it over a longer period of time. To do that, there are three phases of our programming. We do Sprint at Home, which is an online course that is really focused on helping you prepare to pilot in your community. And so it's pretty interactive. It is called a sprint because there is actually a decent amount of work to get you started. So it's sort of an upfront dose of work. We'll talk about that more in detail in a moment. Then in camp, you'll connect to your peers in New Orleans. We actually just had camp about 2 weeks ago. We had 50 entrepreneurs in Wave 4 come through to New Orleans. We had 17 entrepreneur coaches come. A primary purpose of camp is not just to connect you to your peers, but it's to build that first relationship with your founder advisor or your entrepreneur coach that you'll carry through. They'll be your sort of partner in crime. They'll ride shotgun with you as you pilot for the following 5 months, basically. So it's about a 6-month program. When folks have, you know, different scheduling requirements, which school years definitely create those, we try to be flexible with people, but we try to create a sense of urgency with that 6 months where you have enough time to test, to learn, to grow, and to develop, but also so there's a sense of urgency to do that quickly and get the most out of the program. So a little more in depth, Sprint is literally a week-by-week sprint. It's 5 weeks. Each weekend on Sunday evening, again, we're trying to focus on folks being able to do this part-time. We actually get online together as a big wave of fellows, and we do work to prepare your piloting, right? And so it mirrors some of the things you learn in Essentials, goes deeper on some of those things and builds on sort of scaffolds content off of them. And then you'll have a week to work on your own and sort of build from those lectures. And all the while, you'll be connecting with entrepreneur coaches over the phone or online to get feedback on that work, and also to sort of test run or give a trial run to potential mentor relationships. And so it's sort of like speed dating, as we refer to it. Now, before you arrive to camp, you have done that pre-work. You actually share your preferences about your advisors that you've met over that prior 5 weeks. And we do the art, not science work of trying to match you with your entrepreneur coach or your founder advisor. And when you arrive at camp, that's one of the first things you get to do is you get to meet that entrepreneur coach and you start to build a rapport with them and work with them. All the while, you're also connecting with and working in person with your try to make those intentional. If they stay folks a little further along in their work, we try to cluster folks education or way we think people can amazing expertise among here, just from coaches. Lastly, your hey folks, I became muted. Can you hear me now? Amazing. Thank you. You're back. I appreciate you all. Thank you very much. And can you see my screen? Yes. Okay, great. Perfect. Okie doke. So I'll just repeat this because I think this might have been where I muted. But yeah, basically this 5 months of piloting, you set up a great plan. You had key things you wanted to learn that you prepared with your pre-work and as you met your coaches and peers in New Orleans. And this is all about helping you run at those key questions and learn as much as you can about how well your idea works and what the demand for it is. You can see my face and not the slides. Perfect. Coming at you. Give me one moment. So all that to say, this is really about having 5 months to understand how well your venture will work, how your idea will work. And you're not going to leave with a perfectly functional end product. What you're going to leave with, hopefully, is like a further refined idea and with some great stories of success to tell that can carry you in to your next phase of work. And so it's a really exciting time. And it's really fun to see how much ideas can develop in this space. And so just to give you an example to carry forward Nick's story of Rightbrain that Sydney shared earlier, after running that first pop-up, that first travel and writing experience with those 10 students, Nick actually came through Tiny and turned that into a club at a local school that went through an entire semester. And they did a trip every month and they did writing activities every month. And he was really able to understand how students' perception of their own voice changed and see writing skills develop. And also in doing that was also just able to create a ton of demand and excitement about Rightbrain at that school and as a result beyond that school. And so one of my favorite things he would mention is just that at the end of the semester, students would be able to wear their Rightbrain shirts around the school on Fridays, and that they were the ones recruiting other students to come into the club, but he wasn't doing that, which I think is just, again, an amazing step from going from one event, one experience, and building off of that to learn more and more about what the idea would become. And so I want to hand it back to Michaela and just hear, as someone building a school, what was most valuable about, both of these fellowships to you? You already touched on this a little bit, but there are often a lot of school founders that come through our programming, and it can be hard to conceptualize what this stage of work can look like for something that is as big and complex as an endeavor as a school. So I'll hand it to you, Michaela.
Sure. So a lot of different things that are valuable about going through both Essentials and the Tiny Fellowship. Like I mentioned before about Essentials, it was helpful to pitch the idea, because now, that's constantly what I'm doing is talking to parents and explaining to them about how our model works. And the piloting was very customized for what we needed to do. So running an after-school program, letting students map out their own passion projects and seeing them work through that process was helpful to understand what their experience would be, what kind of scaffolding and support we needed, where we could connect it to other parts of the curriculum, things like that. And so those are a lot of insights that we take into how we support students and do all sorts of projects now throughout the school day. And then with Tiny, more of the business side of it was really helpful to get, how do we do fundraising? How do we put together a board? How do we, now we're looking at how do we train teachers and support them, and so many different questions. We were able to learn from other folks in the fellowship. Some of the other fellows in My Wave live here in Atlanta, and so we were able to connect with them and say, hey, could you give us feedback on this, or how are you thinking about this or that, or can you review this document? 4.0 also has this huge list of other grants and programs and things that are also helpful. And so those are helpful as well, thinking about what's next after Tiny, other things that are helpful while you're in the fellowship program. So the networking, the community, and then just general coaching around it all is really, really helpful. And then just a bank of coaches, all the other people who've gone and started schools all throughout the 4.0 network, being able to tap them while I was at the Tiny Camp. I guess it was a week or two ago now. being able to go and see schools that I have looked up to when I was starting and seeing where they are, is really helpful. And to see the kind of questions they're answering, what they're thinking about. So, yeah.
Michaela, thanks for jumping in. And yeah, it's really what Michaela narrated. I would totally plus one. One of the, I think, most fun pieces of this work for me is seeing someone like Michaela pitch an idea for the life school and have it be an amazing pitch, and seeing that go from that to being a group of students going to a school every day and having it transform into that is an amazing thing. And I think I haven't been a school founder myself. I haven't been a founder of an education organization myself, but seeing how impactful it can be to have other folks in that same work a little ahead of you or a little behind you is really special. And I think it's really unique, especially at this stage for school founders. And so I would love to, in the chat, have you all just drop in, what support seems most valuable to you from either fellowship. And candidly, this is kind of like focus grouping for us. We just want to know what stands out to you, what's most exciting and why, so that we can focus on those things and, double down on them. So I'll let the chat open up, and we're going to scan some of these questions that are popping in, and we'll try and address them in the Q&A after. I love seeing some of these highlights. And they seem to cover a lot of bases. Building relationships with others who are open to giving you feedback on your idea. That's definitely something that we want to be true in both of our fellowships, and honestly just in our 4.0 space in general. Somebody said something that I totally wanted to shout out. I don't know where it is now, but it was not rushing from Shantae, not rushing the process, which I think is something that we really believe in. I think sometimes 4.0 has been called an accelerator, and we really think of ourselves as a decelerator, which is, hey, let's pause and let's use this as a space to go slow and be really thoughtful about this work. And so that was a cool thing to see pop up in the chat. Thank you for sharing that. There are a couple questions about schools. I know this popped into the chat earlier, but if anybody was wondering about how schools fit in tactically into your journey as a founder, Hassan actually dropped in a link, if you scroll up a little bit, about the school launch timeline, which can give you some insight as to whether you're a charter school founder or independent school founder or taking some other form, what it could look like timeline-wise for you. That might help answer some of the questions I saw pop in. So we're about to close out and go to Q&A because we're coming up on time here. Just want to name, this was said earlier, but there are over 900 alumni in our 4.0 schools community, and they're all doing tremendously different, interesting work. And we want that to be a big resource to anyone who goes through either fellowship. And so that's just something we want you to know about. You can see it's already here. Jen Chu offered her email, for example, and that's something that we want to continue to foster. And as you leave our fellowship programs, we try to be thoughtful about making connections to partner organizations as we can. And we really try to make connections to alumni that can be supportive really at any time. And so these are just two things to think about as you go through our programming. But that closes out our agenda, at least for where we are talking at you the whole time. And now we're going to hang out for a bit of a Q&A. So if at this point you feel like you've gotten your questions answered and you don't need any more, feel free to hop off. We're going to send a follow-up email with recording of this webinar and with the slide deck. So you will be fine. You won't miss anything. But if you want to stick around to ask questions, we are here to answer them. And we'll just sort of pass it along to whoever can answer with the most relevant expertise. So feel free to drop questions in the chat or unmute and just say what you're thinking.
Hey, Austin, how are you?
Hey, Nat.
Hey, Nat.
Good to see you.
I don't see anybody. I hope you see me. Yay!
Okay, so we have a question. We were thinking about transitioning from Essentials to Tiny. And, you know, I know one of the elements, especially Austin, that you were most excited about what we were doing was the civic engagement piece. And so just thinking about Tiny, are we continuing to build on, would we be continuing to build on the civic engagement piece? Or do we start layering on other elements of our school design? Like, I guess I need more information about what we would be doing in Tiny.
Yeah, I'm happy to connect after this one-on-one if that's helpful. To answer this question in a way that's sort of broad for everyone too, embedded in that question is like, what does Tiny ask you to focus on? And a lot of what Sprint is designed to do, that coursework, is to help you name like the key assumptions and learnings you want to take out of your pilot. So if civic engagement remains like a critical core part of your model that you want to continue to learn. So from Essentials specifically, since you know this terminology, like the core assumptions that you took out of Essentials, the ones that remain as the most risky and most important to test are the things that we're going to ask you to weave into your Tiny pilot. And the main difference is that we ask that you tackle many of them at once, as opposed to, you know, one at a time with pop-ups if it's appropriate. So I don't know if that's helpful, but it's meant to be sort of a personalized journey through that coursework to make sure that we know there's no one size fits all answer to that question, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and if I can just follow up real quick, it's different path, but that way we get both of our questions answered, and then we can let other people jump in. So obviously, you know, we're getting our pop-up going. We have it scheduled already for the 21st, so we have a lot of details set in place to get that running. But I know the application for the Tiny Fellowship, the deadline is coming up not too far from then, and I want to know that we're not sort of, I don't know how to word this correctly, so I'm just going to say what's on my mind. Are we prematurely applying for something like a Tiny Fellowship when we won't have yet been able to process the feedback we've gotten from our pop-up and move to, because we would like to do, of course, a second pop-up and, you know, a third or something, you know, based on what we're seeing and what kind of feedback we're gathering, the engagement the students have, the interest they have. We want to keep going with those types of pop-ups. Is it premature to start looking at something like the Tiny Fellowship, or is that something we should hold off on until we've had those series of them and apply like next school year for the spring fellowship?
That's a great question. And honestly, it's a question that applies to anybody on this call, because if you came through Essentials in the fall, you might be wondering in the spring if it would make sense to apply to Tiny. So one, I'll name its attention for our team, because I think we're trying to set it up in such a way that you can get a pop-up under your belt, do some of that key learning, and then scaffold into Tiny naturally, like semester to semester as we think about it. So on that note, I don't think it should preclude you from applying at all. Secondly, or B, I guess I would say, you know, the interview process for Tiny is hopefully meant to reflect some sense of coaching or support that you might get in the fellowship. And so one thing that I hope will come out of that experience is if you finished your pop-up and then you had an interview, for example, part of that work could be help to synthesize what you learned and might naturally scaffold into what is next. I would say, one, definitely apply, and hopefully we can make it even easier for folks in the future as we schedule our calendars differently for both programs. But also, you know, because of the nature of what our interview process is, I think it actually would hopefully scaffold quite nicely. So yeah, thumbs up, amazing. I see a couple questions in the chat, so I'm just going to respond to a few of those really fast.
Question.
So somebody asked, if we apply for an Essentials Fellowship and your team thinks Tiny would be better, can we do Tiny? Sid, I would love to to hear your perspective on this. I can jump in too, but this is one of the trickier ones.
Yeah, so the way that our application is set up, if you're not sure where you fall or you think there's a chance you can be in either, we suggest you apply to the Tiny Fellowship. A lot of our questions, in fact, the first like 2/3 of the application are the exact same. So what happens is if you apply to the Tiny Fellowship, and as our team reviews the applications and we think you might be a better fit for Essentials, we'll let you know when this happens, but we'll just slot you into the Essentials selection process. It doesn't work the other way around. So if you think you're unsure, apply for the Tiny Fellowship, because if you apply for Essentials and we think you're too far along, we don't have all the other information that would have surfaced in the Tiny Fellowship, so we won't be able to work with you this go around. So basically, if there's any question, we suggest apply for a Tiny. Also happy to follow up if you would rather just like talk to one of us beforehand to see. All of our emails are our first names at the number 4 letters pt0.org. And Hassan will type his in the, or Brianna will type theirs in the chat box or somebody so you can see what that looks like. Because I know it's kind of hard to hear numbers and letters, but we're all happy to answer questions about fit. If you prefer to do that, then just to apply for Tiny.
I have a question. Hello? Can you hear me?
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, I really jump in.
You know, I started with the idea of, you know, I went through Essential with the idea of teacher leadership, and that turned out to be too advanced because a lot of teachers are suffering from immediate problems of not having enough people in a classroom, not having good classroom management. So we are starting our pop-up there, but when we get to Tiny, I'm hoping to get those teachers to the leadership point and eventually to open up a school. So can we, you know, when we are applying for Tiny, of course, after I finish Essential, can we do a program and also, you know, spend the money on the school, developing school as well, or just we can do one or the other? And the second thing I want to know is that school has to be charter school or could it be a private school?
All right, so great questions. The first, I will say, playing it back to you, it sounds like there may be 2 parallel ideas you're thinking about, one that may lead into the other, or they might actually be separate. So I'd say it'd be good to follow up and talk about that one-on-one. We try to focus on like a core idea. So if you were thinking about a school and like a teacher, like consulting service, for example, or like a teacher training service, it would be hard for us to support you on both. But I think you're also talking about something slightly different. So would love to just shoot it. I'll send you my email after. On the second question, if you want to start a school, we're agnostic about the form that school might take. So it could be a charter, it could be an independent school. I'm trying to think if there are any other like forms that have come through. Yeah, in district school. And so, yeah, actually we've had a few folks in district as well. So we are agnostic about that. And I think try to make sure that the pilots that you're running reflect what you're hoping to run towards as well.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So one thing that was great, a great question that came through is about the application process, and can we give you some insight into that? First and foremost, I want to highlight there's an amazing resource on our website that you can actually sign up for coaching for the application itself. So if you want more targeted questions about how to approach a question or how to go through the actual application, I would highly recommend that because it can get personal and focused on what you're specifically concerned about in a way that I don't know that I could here. Secondly, I will say the application process beyond that app, which as Sydney mentioned, starts with an application that is pretty uniform, whether you're in Essentials or Tiny. Tiny is almost like an addendum. You get a few extra questions if you're applying to that. We screen it all together as a team, and if there are any applications that seem like they're slightly earlier stage than Tiny and might be a great fit for Essentials, we actually will sort those into the Essentials application process, and at that point, the interviews look different. So there is the written application and there is a virtual interview for both. The phone interview for Essentials is about 30 minutes long, and it is focused on a couple pieces of feedback about your application. It's kind of like a coaching call, and a chance to sort of give feedback in a way that might look like what Essentials will be like in your actual weekend experience when you're working with peers. The Tiny Fellowship interview is about 50 minutes long, and it is a lot like a coaching call. So it's a video call, and we're going to actually work through like the most pressing concerns that you have about your idea right now. So it's a chance for us to jump in and hopefully thought partner with you in a really meaningful way, even if it's just for this interview. And so some things to focus on for both are really just about like being prepared to take some feedback, and also being prepared to seek feedback and to kind of lay out the things that you're most curious about and that you feel like you need the most help with. So for us, like we want this to be a space where we're able to like partner with you and move quickly and help you make progress on the things that you see as important, and also push you on what you see as really important. And so for us to do that well, we think like definitely bring the stuff that you're worried about and be open about that, because it can be really helpful and make that time meaningful. And let's see, so that's just a preview of the interview process. I also saw a question about what are just like some of our most successful alumni. And I encourage you to scroll through our venture page on our website just to see who's there. I am hesitant to define success in one particular way. I think Michaela at camp 2 weeks ago actually asked me this question, and I responded in a way that was, I think, a little bit of a dodge, but ultimately was saying like, you know, I've had more proximity to some of our teams. So I've gotten to go see Jonathan Johnson, his school Rooted here in New Orleans, for example. And I've gotten to see what that school is like. I've gotten to go visit certain pop-ups. So I've seen things more personally with some founders than others. But the thing I've always been most proud of when I've visited an alum's work or reviewed an alum's work is seeing something that's incredibly student-centered, where student voice is at the like absolute core of everything that is being done. So Rightbrain that we talked about has actually been one of my favorite New Orleans alums, just because it's been a chance because I've had a chance to meet those students and see some of their writing, and they're incredible and it's incredible. And the reason that's true is because I think Nick went into this work with little to no ego and listened to students from the very beginning and built something with them. So that's probably a dodge of an answer, but I think when I've seen schools come out of our programming that look like that, and when I've seen tech tools that look like that, it's been a delight for me. So that's just a reflection here. Let's see. And I'm checking a few other questions in the chat.
So
one other thing that I want to name too is that a lot of these, you know, questions that are specific to your venture, if you want like additional help processing after this, is there's a chat bubble at 4pt0.org that just pops up in the bottom right. And one of our coworkers, Harlan, will be monitoring that and is here to help answer questions and talk through things with you. So if you don't get your question answered now, and if we can't follow up after this, that's another great place to go have a conversation one-on-one to get additional help. And Marcia, happy to do that. 4P. Okay, sweet. There you are. And so I'm just going to see if there were any other questions that were necessary to address for everybody else. Let's see. Awesome. Well, there were a few one-on-one questions. Brandon, I think this is a good question I'll share with everybody. Brandon said, does my team still need to go through the same process if we've already done run 2 to 3 iterations? Do we jump straight to coaching, or do we still need to take 6 months to go to our first pilot? This might be better to go through again a one-on-one conversation on the website just to get a better sense sort of diagnostically of where you're at with those iterations. But one thing I will say is that there's definitely like a band of experience that founders, come in with for both fellowships. And if you come into to Essentials, you may actually have done some work with users already. If you come to Tiny, you may have done like just one pop-up, or you may have done many. And it's meant to be personalized and help you focus on what is most important for you right now. And the main thing we try to avoid is, if you're thinking about like scaling your program or scaling your school, like opening year one, your charter, for example, which somebody asked about, like that is not where we're best able to support you, because that has so much to do with operational capacity, has so much to do with the like brick and mortar work of opening a school, or the actual technical capacity to build an ed tech company. We're here to help you test assumptions, help you understand basically the students and families that you want to work with, and how to solve a problem in a small way to start. And so in that way, it's personalized, but I would say the thing that I would think about is if you're in a place where you're like, I really want to grow and go big, it's antithetical to the name, Tiny Fellowship. And so that's something to think about. But we're about 15 minutes over now. Thank you all who stuck around for this Q&A and for sharing your evening with us. It's been a pleasure to meet you, if only through the chat box, but I hope to meet you in real life. We are, again, on call at 4pt0.org. In the chat box, you can get a lot of your questions answered, and there's also a form there for application coaching. So if anything that wasn't answered here is left in the back of your head percolating, please go there. We want those resources to be used. But again, thank you for taking the time, and yeah, we're really excited to meet you. Take care.